Hi, I'm Jeremy Kirk, Executive Editor with Information Security Media Group. I'm pleased to be speaking with Brodtmann, who's an Australian Member of Parliament and Shadow Assistant Minister for Cybersecurity and Defence. Thank you very much for joining us, Gay.
It's lovely to be here, Jeremy, here in Singapore.
Yes, so a lot of countries are very worried about cyber attacks on their critical infrastructure. Can you give me an idea of how Australia is approaching this issue?
Well, Australia has identified 8 sectors that it regards as critical infrastructure, and that is vitally important to our social cohesion, to our public safety, to our economic prosperity, to our national security. So we've identified 8 sectors, but I have, as opposition, have been critical of the government in the fact that we are underdone in terms of those 8 sectors. Yes, it's terrific that we actually have 8 sectors acknowledged as critical, as vital to our cohesion, our safety, our security, our prosperity. But compared to other nations, we are underdone. The US has 16 sectors, the UK has more than 10 sectors, Singapore has more than 10 sectors, Canada has more than 10 sectors, New Zealand has more than 10 sectors, here we are on 8. So I do believe that we need to have more sectors, we need to broaden out those sectors to include areas like electoral infrastructure, vitally important given what we saw in France and the US.
And one of the keys to sort of successfully doing this is partnerships between business and government. How is Australia going about fostering that cooperation between private industry and government?
Well, the government has modelled our system on the UK system, the National Cyber Security Centre system, and we've got the Australian Cyber Security Centre, and we also have in states and joint cyber security centres. Now, the joint cyber security centres are still very underdone, it's still very early days, but the idea of those joint centres as well as the Australian Centre is to bring industry together with the public sector so that they can share, so that our security agencies, so our businesses, our critical infrastructure, our industry, our universities can share information on cybersecurity.
And there's been a huge emphasis on that, sharing information, and that's an issue like in many different countries as well. And so are there things that I guess, how do you make businesses sort of trust government? How do you make government trust the businesses? But is it hard to get that sort of cooperation
This is a real challenge, and this is what I hear from industry all the time, in the fact that they're willing to give information, but they're not getting it, that's not reciprocated by the Australians, the ASD and other security outfits. And so this is the real challenge, is getting that trust between industry, the private sector and the public sector. It's vitally important to our national security, and it was the point that was made by the US Command Vision that they recently released. In fact, that was really underscored in the fact that that partnership, that cooperation between the private and public sector is vital for national security.
And Australia's been looking at, Australia launched a cybersecurity strategy 2 years ago, and it's been looking at critical infrastructure for at least 3 years. How are you going to measure whether critical infrastructure is actually more secure?
It's a very good question, and it's a challenge because you've got a lot of qualitative measures here as well as quantitative measures. I think that one way that you can measure is by getting KPIs written into CEOs, the C-suite's performance agreements. That would be important. Also, KPIs written into the boards of those large companies. They're written into their agendas and into their performance agreements. I think the cultural change and behavioural change needs to be factored into organisations, because I've heard of stories of critical infrastructure outfits where the passwords are still being written on post-it notes. So we do need to get that behavioural change, that cultural change in those organisations. Also standards, we need to be thinking about standards. Government entities. The 14 government entities have been audited by the Australian National Audit Office on cyber security, cyber resilience, to see if they comply with mandated ASD standards. Only 4 of them have been found to be compliant. 4 of them have been found to be cyber resilient. So looking at standards and mandating standards, I think we need to explore a range of options, both the qualitative, the quantitative, and of course independent audits.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us, Gay.
That's okay.
I've been speaking with Brodtmann, who's a Member of Parliament and Shadow Assistant Minister for Cybersecurity and Defence. For Information Security Media Group, I'm Jeremy Kirk.